so here's our series on faithfulness. We're going to focus around the young, the strong, and the faithful. So that's us. We're young compared to the adults, and we're stronger in the faith, and we want to be faithful with that. So getting into it tonight, I just want to do an overview on faithfulness. All right, so an introduction to faithfulness. I'm going to be looking at three main passages. Each passage is like really long, so I'm not going to read it all, but I'm going to read like the key verses and then kind of just explain the story in the context, so that you get the context and you can just get the main passages. So the first passage we're going to be looking at is 1 Samuel 17. We're going to be talking about the faith of the young. The wisdom of the young in verses 22 and 26 of Samuel 17. I'm going to read verse 25. So the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel." So let's just give a little context here. David, he's chilling at home with his dad. His dad says, "Go give," I know you guys know the story, "go give the supplies to your brothers." So he goes out to give the supplies to his brothers. He sees the battle that's about to start. So he sets the supplies down in the supply area. He runs to the battlefront, and he's like, "What's going on, guys?" And all the people of Israel are scared. They're scared of Goliath. And so he's like talking to them, and one of the Israelites say, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel." So here we see the wisdom of these experienced older guys in battle. These experienced older guys in battle look at Goliath and they say, "Okay, he's challenging one man, Goliath, against our best warrior to a fight. None of us can beat this giant 10-foot guy. None of us can." So we know that because we're warriors. We fought before. None of us could do this. So we're not going to even go against him. And then on top of that, the king of Israel, Saul, he put like this great reward. Riches, marry his daughter, no more taxes for your father's household. This great reward for whoever beats Goliath. Still, nobody wanted to go up and fight against Goliath. And it was wise to do so. It was wise because Goliath is a good fighter. Now, let's look at David. David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, "What shall be done for a man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel?" This is verse 26. "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" So this is the wisdom of David, the wisdom of youth. He's grown up his whole life hearing God's on our side and nobody can defeat our God. And he goes out to this battlefield and sees all of these strong men who outwardly express that, being scared of a Philistine, who is defying God. Goliath was just, blaspheming God all over the place. And David's like, why are we scared of him if God is so strong? And this is the contrast between the young and the old. Wisdom. In our lives, older people than us, will have wisdom of we should be cautionary. We should hold back. We should wait type of thing, which is good. Don't get me wrong. It's really good wisdom. Our unique perspective is not having experience those problems. And so we can go full force trusting in God in whatever situation we have. If we get ourselves into a sticky situation, which we will, because we're young adults, when we live in a world where young adults are in sticky situations all the time, we can have faith in God to overcome that and get through that. We can trust in God to get through things that seem impossible. That's the point there, wisdom of the young. Just having that faith in God to get us through. Faith with the small in verses 32 and 37. "If we're faithful with the small things, God will give us great things." And you look in verse 36, "Your servant has killed both." This is, give you more context. This is David talking to Saul. David goes up to Saul and says, "I can fight Goliath." Saul's like, "No, you can't. You're just a little kid. This guy's an experienced fighter." David says, "Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing as he has defied the armies of the living God." So David's like, back at home, I fought lions and bears. And that was God preparing me for this, and I can defeat him just like I defeated them. And that's being faithful to the small things, and God will give us great things. God gave David small things to deal with. lions, bears, right? That he had to fight off against the sheep that he was protecting. Now God's giving David Goliath. With us, particularly with this group right here, God's giving us small things right now, whether that be this ministry or the worship ministry or any other ministries you're doing. God's giving you small things right now. Later, there's going to be great things for each one of us that God's going to give us if we're faithful to things right now. And if you look further, in verse 37, moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So this is David having complete faith in just that. God's faithfulness in his small things, God's faithfulness in David, protecting David against the lion and the bear will transfer into God being faithful with Goliath. And that's the same thing in our lives. God was faithful with us so far, correct? Each one of us are here in this room, which means God's got us this far. Each one of us has gone through things, which means God's got us through those things. If God's been faithful here, God will be faithful in the future. I like this quote one of my professors said, what God has done in the past is a pattern and promise for what God will do in the future. So God doesn't change. He protected us in the past. He provided for us in the past. That's a pattern and a promise for his protection and his guidance in the future. Faith of the young. So David goes up against Goliath, and remember, David only has stone and a sling, and Goliath has his armor and his armor bearer and his sword and his helmet and all of this protection on him. And David says, after Goliath mocks him and mocks David's God and stuff, David says to Goliath, you come to me with a sword and a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Now this is fearless faith, and this is another thing that we're called to as young adults. We don't have the luxury of running into problems like our parents in that age group have. They have the luxury of being wise from those problems. We don't have the luxury of that. So what we hold on to is faith in God. Fearless faith. Whatever comes up against us, God's going to get us through. God is bigger. That's David's point here. All I know is God is bigger. It's like a fact thing. What are the facts in this situation? We're in a situation that's tricky with sin or with people that we're dealing with, or we stumble into something. We're in a situation that's tricky. What is the facts? The biggest fact we know is God is bigger. That's basically what David said right here. God is bigger. And if God is bigger, he can prevail through me. So that's what we learn, the faith of the young from 1 Samuel 17. Moving on to the second passage, Judges 14 through 16. We're going to see the faith of the strong. In verses 5 through 7 of chapter 14, we see the gift of strength. So this is Solomon. And Solomon comes and he is given strength by the Lord. And so he grows up. He was given it as a child, and he grows up. And he's walking somewhere with his parents one day. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand, but he did not tell his mother or his father what he had done. And just kind of a side note, then he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. Isn't that, I said Solomon, right? I meant Samson. But isn't that great? So he's walking down the street one day, a lion comes up to him. He rips the lion apart because he's strong from the Lord, and he uses a pickup line. Hey, baby, I'll rip apart this lion. Yeah, feel my muscles. Yeah, just kidding. Anyway, so God gives us our gifts of strength. That's basically all we know at this point in the story. God gave Samson his strength. Are you making fun of my muscles? You were, huh? I'm just kidding. Okay, so God gives us our gifts of strength. So each one of us has gifts. God gives us those gifts, and they're strong. in certain ways, in different ways than one another. And I know you guys know this, but it's the basics. God's gifts are powerful. Think of all of God's power. God's power is working through us, the Bible says. Jesus was confident enough to say that we would do greater works than him. And it's a little bit out of context, but I just want to take the point of it, which is that God's going to be working through us mightily through the Spirit and the gifts he's given us. So moving on from that, in chapter 16, verses 15 through 21, we see not using our gifts properly. So this is Samson. He's talking to Delilah, famous part. And Delilah and Samson have gone back and forth at this point. And Delilah's like, how can you lose your strength? And Samson's like, do this. And the Philistines do that. And then Samson. I keep wanting to say Solomon. Samson, rips them apart. And then it goes back and forth. And on the third time, Delilah's just really pestering him. And it came to pass in verse 16, when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart, and said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. So he gives up his trick and his Nazirite vow, and God takes his strength away, and he gets taken by the Philistines, and they gouge his eye out and lock him up, make him work in the prison. That's using our gifts unfaithfully. Now with us, if we don't use our gifts, or if we waste them away, or if we use them for things that are unholy, we are not using our gifts faithfully. So we want to make sure we're serving using our gifts. Not just, I served at church on Sunday, but serving using our gifts on a daily basis. We want to be using them properly to the best of our ability, faithfully. And then we don't want to be using them for bad things, which is possible. If you're really good at speaking to people and you use your gift to persuade people to do things you want in a negative light, that's using your gifts badly. We want to use the gifts God gave us in a positive light. Now, faithful with the gift, in verse 28 through 30, Samson goes through this whole process. He knows what he did wrong. He repents. Then Samson said, let me die with the Philistines, in verse 30. And he pushed with all his might, and the temple fell, and the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his entire life. So that's after he repented in verse 28 and said, oh Lord God, remember me, I pray, strengthen me, I pray. So we want to model this part of Samson's life. He's faithful to God, and God uses it mightily. In the same way, if we're faithful to God, if we're repentant to God, God will use us in a mighty way. All right, passage number 3 in Genesis 22, we see faith with life. Tests to the faithful in verses 1 and 2. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And then he said, take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So God tests our faithfulness to strengthen us. Now, here's the difference. God doesn't tempt us to sin, but God tests our faithfulness. And that's what he's doing here with Abraham. God's going to give us trials so that our faith is strengthened in him. So God puts things in our path where we have to trust in him, and then grows our faith. And as young people, it's going to happen a lot and more. And if we're doing good now, it'll happen more and more in the future, and as we get stronger and stronger and stronger. So we want to prepare for that now. We want to prepare to go through trials faithfully. In verse 3 through 12, we see the life of the faithful. In verse 5, and Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. But Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And then he said, look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the two of them went together. And he said, do not lay your hand on the lad. Oh, sorry, I skipped a part. But basically, I want to focus on a couple points here. First of all, Abraham's men with him and Lot, or him and his son Isaac. They're like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Stay here. We're going to go up and worship, and we're going to come back." So his faith was that they're both coming back. Also, his faith about this process of sacrificing his son was an act of worship. So God's going to call us to things that are difficult. God's going to take us through things that are difficult. We'll have faith in him that God's going to get us through, that God's going to provide, that God's going to get our family through. We have faith in God that he's going to provide what we need. Abraham had faith when his son asked him, "Where's the offering?" Abraham had faith that God would provide him an offering. We can have faith that God will provide us things that we need. In verse 13 through 18, we see the reward of faithfulness. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering to his son. Abraham's about to go sacrifice his son faithfully. God stops him. God provides a ram. It's not God's goal to hurt us or to take things from us, but to provide for us, whether that be physically or just spiritually provide for us. So we need to trust him with everything we have. He's given us everything we have, so we trust it back to him. Trust that he's going to give us whatever we need or better. And then the blessing. The Lord blesses the faithful. After Abraham showed his faith, God said, "Blessings I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sands which are on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies." Now, I want to be careful here. This is what I call descriptive, not prescriptive. So it's describing something that happens. God blessed Abraham for being faithful physically with multiple descendants. We may or may not be blessed physically. It could happen. God could bless us physically for being faithful, or he could not. But no matter what, we're going to be blessed spiritually if we're faithful. And we're going to be blessed in heaven if we're faithful. Eternal reward is what we're going to be blessed with. So that's kind of the overview of, or the introduction to faithfulness. I just wanted to show these three main passages to kind of see a general overview of kind of all the aspects and kind of our themes here. Being faithful and young, being faithful as leaders, and being faithful in our lives.